So what I'm going to cover in this video is creating a material for a terrain that incorporates curvature filtering and slope filtering. I can't go through the entire process of creating a material to being completely finished because it's so time consuming it would span many hours of video, so it's just going to have to be the basics. And even with the basics, some understanding of the deep texture editor will be necessary, otherwise it'll be completely baffling, so consider this an advanced video. Right, what I've done is I've taken one of Horrow's high resolution terrains and cropped a square out of it and reduced the resolution, but keeping the resolution relative to the terrain, so it's just a smaller area of a larger resolution terrain just to make it easier to process. Now if I go into the overhead view, you can see what the setup is. So there's just a bit of terrain and my camera. Things are very simple and straightforward. There's a sheer ledge here. This is a result of the cropping process. It's caught some odd bits, so that's not strictly valid. It's not a 4096 resolution terrain, it's only 1024, but it's only a bit of that terrain. Okay, so in the material lab, we'll start the setup. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a blob in the diffuse channel for channel B. Now the reason I've chosen channel B is because this is the channel that's going to be selected by the slope filter to do the more vertical sections. So in fact I'll show you that process. So for this one I'll just select this placid wave from the basic selection, so that's just giving a blue output, and I'll hold the control key down and click on channel C, so that'll activate channel C as the filter channel, and channel A shall put in something that's obviously a different colour from this blue thing, so we'll use something more dramatic like these sine layers. So there you go, be able to tell the difference between those two, and then hold the shift key down, click on the name there, and I shall get basic slope. So you can see in the main view that the blue area is being selected by the slope filter and the ground is getting stripy. So if I wanted to modify the slope filter here, if I increase this value, it pushes this grey area across that way, and what that's doing effectively is increasing the transition, the sharpness of the transition, so we're getting more of the rocky area that will be the rocky area, and this stripy area will make grass. So that is my reasoning for wanting to put my curvature filter in here, because I want the curvature filter to affect the rocks and not the ground. But what I shall do, I shall just go back to working in this one channel here, is show you the curvature filtering first, and then we'll isolate it with the slope filter and put something suitable in for the ground afterwards. So I'll hold shift down and click on the name there and bring in a slope filter as the one to adjust, so you can see the effect of the slope filter on its own now. I've had actual selection here and navigated this view like this, so I just reset it there. You can hold the control key down, I think, and that allows you to zoom in, and if you just use the mouse on its own, it rolls it around, so this is handy. If you use these very high resolution terrains and use actual selection, it'll slow things down too much, which is why I cropped the terrain down. So in the basic slope, there are several ways of applying a curvature filter in the deep texture editor. You can use curvature to select the colours, and then that allows you to do other filtering here. You can use blend modes, and this works in the same way as the blend modes like fast slope and blend slope, but because we're trying to keep things simple for this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the filter option here and select curvature down here. So I've just put in a curvature filter, but swap the slope filter for the curvature filter, so this has a setting on it at the moment, which we could either use or we could reset it to its default state. If you reset it to default state, it will act exactly the same as that curvature there. So this allows us to move the sensitivity of the curvature around, which you'll see in operation. Now because I've put a curvature filter in this B channel, Bryce will have detected that and automatically turned curvature on, and we can preview the effects of some of these options here. So you can turn curvature off and see that that's disabled, turn it on and see what it's doing. You can see what linear scaling does, Linear scaling is essentially moving this point here around, so it just opens up different parts of the filter for selection. You'd have to play with that to see how it's really working, and I don't want to get too deeply into that. Find concave is useful because this means that the filter starts to not just detect whether or not a surface is sharply curved or smooth and fairly level, but it differentiates between a convex and a concave surface, and that's useful for our terrain because that will allow us to detect outward jutting bits of the terrain which we can make look rocky, hopefully. And finally, hard edges. This is a point at which, if you've got a saddle, you've got a point where, or a corner, for example. If you've got a saddle, you're in a very difficult position because you have geometry going down on one side, which means the point is convex, but geometry going up on the other two sides, which means it's concave. So it's very hard to know whether or not you treat that as a convex point, a concave point, or a level point. So I think we chose level. But in going into a corner or out to a pointy out edge, you have to decide that whether the lead-in points, because they only have an X and Y inward curve, whether they count as being on the curve or not. And that's, or if you don't have hard edges, you just have the points because they've got an X, Y. It's getting really complicated. Anyway, just choose hard edges for terrains. That's probably the best answer. So have a preview of what you've got so far, and you can see, irrespective of whether you understand all this about whether something's curved or not, that it's having a visible effect, and to the artist that's the most important thing. And what you can see here is you've got this darker greenish area here and the grey on the pointy outer bits, which is useful because we can make the pointy out bits a rocky colour and the green bits darker, and that'll make those bits stand out. So we'll just process this bit of the texture now in the deep texture editor, and you can incorporate, if we click on these corners, it opens the various dialogues. You can incorporate some noise. So I'm going to use some random lines, and I'm going to rotate them around so that they're horizontal. Okay, so just rotate it around there, and then I'll increase the octaves, and we'll need some bump for this. I'll just click out of there and give some bump, and this is just some horizontal banding on our what is going to be our rocks, and then I'll disrupt this with fractal noise. I'll make it 3D so it disrupts in all dimensions, and then I'll just add a bit of phase to that. So what's happened is that the lines have been pushed around by the fractal noise that I've added, and this is just another noise function, but it's the one in the phase channel. So you have your initial pattern, which is just the horizontal lines created by random lines, and then the phase function, which just distorts that a bit to make it a bit wiggly, which should hopefully make it a little bit more natural looking. So we'll just check out of there and have a quick preview of how that's looking. So that effect has not been very strong. You can just see a hint of that effect, and the reason for that is that the curvature filter is dominating at the moment. So what we can do is we could reset the curvature filter, and you can see now that mostly the pattern is dominating. We'll probably get very little curvature effect on this now. So you can see more of the green, but we can also see a bit more of the banding in there now because it's brought the green up to the surface. So this is how the curvature filter is working with this function. So if we increase the curvature, it's becoming quite plain here because the curvature is dominating. So we'll make that a light grey. We'll make this one, well, a darker grey, and we'll make this one a dark sort of a greeny colour. There we go. So there we go, dark green. There. So hopefully that will emphasize the cragginess of the surface, and we can see some of these little horizontal bands just to break it up a bit. I probably overemphasized a bit there, but that's okay. We can move the filter around. So if I reset this and then just lift that a little bit, there we go. So what I wanted to do was just emphasize the rock poking out, but it's all very craggy and rocky now. So the next stage is I'll hold the control key down and click on C there, I've still not got any bump in this yet either, which I put the bump on the output. So before I get any further, let's have a quick look at what the bump's doing, because that might help emphasize our pattern here rather than the curvature, because the curvature doesn't really provide any bump. So you can see a few more of the horizontal bands now breaking this up. They're quite high frequency, so it might be an idea just to lower the frequency either here through the noise, we've got the frequency control, or here through the transformation tool. So I can just lower this down a bit, and it'll spread those bands out, perhaps make them a bit more noticeable, and just break things up a little bit more. So you can see there's an obvious horizontal band in that pattern now. Right, so where was I before? I was going to add a C channel, so I can use a filter in the C channel to switch between this, which is going to be my vertical surface, to a horizontal surface, which I'll try and make look a bit grassy. So I'll hold the control key down, click on C, hold the shift key down, click on the name here, and I'll give this basic slope. And what I shall do, so I can work on this one in the exclusion of the others, is I shall just hold the control key down, click on C for the bump, and then so I can just see the colour of the basic slope channel. I'll click on this A channel, and then I'll go in here, and what I'm going to do is push the filter off to the left a bit, so you can see that the slope is settling into the bottom here. So what I want to do is have some slope filtering on this area, and then have the switch over. So we can see by the bump but no curvature effect that the bumps that are set up in that is affecting this, but not this hopefully, or very slightly at the moment. So I'm just wanting some colours in the very valley there to come through, so I can switch between these using curvature. So I'll just keep pushing this down, so it's got some transitions here, and then I shall choose an appropriate colour for this. Actually, I'm getting switched with this wavy for the bump height, so probably I should hold the shift key down and bring in what I hope to be my filter here. This filtering, when you use the 3 channels, is done through the alpha channel, so in actual fact the colour's not playing any part in that, so you can switch that off. So let's see where we are with this. Okay, right, so that's a bit clearer. So this green's obviously a bit too bright and a little bit too plain, so what I shall do is I shall again make a dark green colour. There we go, and another green colour here that's not quite as bright green for the slopey bit, and we'll have this just a grey. Let's see how that looks. Right, so there we go. So this here on these, if they don't get picked up by the curvature filter, will at least have some sort of feature on them. The next thing we're going to do is introduce a bit of bump for this, just to give it some feature. So often for grass and that kind of thing, use Veroni distance squared. I'll make it 3D. You can see it's a sort of blobby texture there. I'll increase the octaves so it's got some patterning in it. If you look at the bump for this, it's actually inside out, so I shall want to give negative bump. I don't know what level yet, so I'll just set it at 100 and work that out in a minute. Go into the deep texture editor. I'm going to break this pattern up a bit with some phase, so let's see, fractal phase again. I'll use 3D, increase the frequency, just add a few blobs of that, and you can see it's breaking that pattern up so it's less obviously just made up of some sphere shaped blobs. Okay, I don't know what level to go for, probably that, and we'll have a look how that looks now with some bump. So you see that's just added a bit of detail to that surface there and broken it up a bit. And then what I want to do is bring the curvature filter back in with this slope filter, so hold the control key down and press on C, and then we'll have a look whether we've got anywhere with this. So this green's a little bit, well, acidic coloured, I would say, so that's something to attend to. I can take this here and just move it towards the yellower end of the spectrum. It stops it from looking quite so garish. There we go, and probably this one here that we set up earlier needs to be moved a bit, so you can just give it a bit of a more natural colouring. And you can see now that the curvature filter's exposing these rocks on the outside and creating channels on the middle there, and the slope filter's putting this ground texture in. Now we can, I said we can incorporate curvature filtering and colouring at the same time. So if we switch from linear interpolative to curvature, we can have the slope filter and the curvature filter active at the same time. Though things start to get a bit complicated then, and you can see I've applied this, but it's not really that clear which colour is being put where. So to get around this, what I can do is just drag and drop that one into the next channel component and save it, and then I'll just put some really bright colours in here so I can see where these bits are ending up, and then that'll help me make my colour choices and see whether it's a worthwhile thing to do. So you can see where the blues, so there's a little bit of yellow on there, odd bits of blue cropping up here and here, but mostly it's going to be what was designated the green colour there that's been moved around. So that just gives you an idea of how the curvature filter and the slope filter would be working together. So if I want to get back to where I was, I can just do that, and then because of what I've seen, I can decide if I made that one a bit brighter, then the effect would stand out more on these exposed edges. So you could actually sort of make it look a bit craggier, for example, though that's not really that nice an effect, to be fair. I'll just bring that back. I preferred it as it was, actually. So that is basic introduction to adding a curvature filter to a terrain. So this is where you'd start with building your terrain up. Ideally, you would try and separate off the various parts. So work on one part. What you can do, if you know you're not using a channel, for example, so we're not going to use anisotropy in this, so I can press Ctrl T down, pop everything in C, and then I can just work on one channel at a time. So I could work on channel A and see what that's doing. So I can do all my work on this bit, and then I can work on channel B in exclusion just by swapping across there. But I've got all the other bits saved, so I don't need to worry. They won't get lost when I go in and out. Because if you go in and out and you've not got these selected, so if I just go like this and go out and then I test it and go back into the material, I've lost my other channels, and then you have to start going all Control Z and Control Z again, and then wonder if that's going to bring them back. No, it isn't, and then you get Control Z, and then you're watching the preview here and then go into the material. That's happened to me a lot, so that's just a way of recovering it if you've accidentally switched off channels and not managed to save them somewhere else where you don't need them. Okay then, so really I could go on about this for quite a long time, but that is a start to how you would set up the curvature filtering. And after you've been doing it a while and you build up a lot of layers, for example, here's one I prepared earlier, then what you have is a multiple channels. So for example, in the filter channel, instead of just a slope, you can incorporate, say, altitude filtering or even curvature filtering. You might add curvature filtering in there, so the filter can respond overall to the terrain. So if you wanted to see, let's see if we can find one with some curvature filtering in as well. So these are from the set that Horror and I have set up rightly. This one looks like it's got some curvature in, that's good. Okay, so if you wanted to see the effect of the filter that's selecting between these two components here on its own, you could store everything in there if you wanted to recover it as you did before. I've got this saved in the library, so don't worry about that. And I'll just use the filter to provide the diffuse colour, and you can then start switching the colour on from each one of these, and you can see I've assigned quite strong colours to them just to help me determine the same set each time. And then when I do that, you can see the effect. So you can see where they're predominantly switching to one channel and where it's predominantly switching to another channel, and where you've got these blends where it's taking a bit from each channel, which you know, obviously is quite an advanced use of the process, but it's worth persevering with because the effects can be very good and natural if you've got the right kind of terrain geometry to apply it to. Curvature is highly dependent on the geometry of whatever you're applying the curvature filter to. If the resolution is too low, it can only detect curvature across individual facets of the mesh. The lower the geometry of the mesh, the harsher the transitions will be in the curvature filter, and you might see some like pixelation occurring, but it's not pixels on the screen, it's pixels that are actually facets of the mesh that you're seeing as the curvature is trying to determine whether or not that particular facet's on a concave or a convex. So high resolution meshes are essential, as is a lot of patience. So, well, I hope you found that useful, interesting, and that you will experiment with curvature filtering on your terrains.